The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Helen Miller with Ohio EPA, and we'll be starting our presentation in approximately 1 minute as we still have some folks logging on. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Common Ohio Brownfield Funding Sources in Ohio. My name's Helen Miller with the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance here at Ohio EPA, and I will be moderating this afternoon's presentation. Our presenters today are Roxanne Anderson with Ohio EPA, Amy Yursevich with the Kansas State University's Technical Assistance to Brownfields Program, and Carla Auker with US EPA. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items to help you participate and engage with our presenters. On this slide, you see an example screenshot of your attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer desktop on the right-hand side of your screen. For this presentation, you are listening in using your computer audio. If you're having sound issues or if the slides stop advancing, try refreshing your browser. If that doesn't work, try logging off and logging back in. Please feel free to submit questions to the presenters by clicking on the question mark icon and typing them into the questions pane on your attendee interface. You may send your questions in at any time during the presentation. We will try our best to answer questions as they come in and during the Q&A portion. If we don't answer your question during the Q&A portion, we will reach out to you via email following today's webinar. You can also click on the document icon to view included handouts. Handouts today include a PDF file of the PowerPoint slides used for today's presentation. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive an email after the webinar with a link to the recording, a link to the survey, and a link to your certificate of attendance. The survey will also pop up once the webinar ends. We value your feedback and would greatly appreciate it if you let us know how we're doing and let us know if there's anything we can do to assist you. This webinar is approved for 1 hour of registered environmental health specialist and environmental health specialist in training credit. To receive credit for attending, please provide your REHS or EHSIT number in the post-webinar survey, so Ohio EPA can submit on your behalf to the Ohio Department of Health. If you're seeking other CEUs, see our related fact sheet, also included as a handout to this afternoon's session. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Roxanne Anderson.
Good afternoon. My name is Roxanne Anderson, and I work as a Brownfields Coordinator with the Ohio Brownfields Program in the Ohio EPA. Today, I hope to provide a broad overview of the common brownfield funding sources available in Ohio. Just so we're all on the same page, I wanted to give the abbreviated legal definitions of a brownfield. The federal definition considers a brownfield as a real property where the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. The state definition considers a brownfield as an abandoned, idled, or underused industrial, commercial, or institutional property where the expansion or redevelopment is complicated by known or potential releases of hazardous substances or petroleum. As you can imagine, properties that have potential contamination can have a stigma in small communities, which can lead them to sit vacant for decades. The goal of the Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program, or TBA, as I'll refer to it, is to help communities redevelop these properties by providing free assessment services. While some brownfields may be painfully obvious, such as abandoned gas stations, coal yards, mine-scarred lands, and industrial manufacturing facilities, others might be more elusive. Many communities have properties that qualify for assistance that they did not realize were considered brownfields, such as shopping malls, schools, churches, apartment buildings, dry cleaners, shooting ranges, lumberyards, hospitals, and medical facilities. It is often the perception of the contamination that keeps properties from being redeveloped, not the actual presence of it. The only way to be sure what is needed for the property is to conduct an environmental investigation. Investment in brownfields is important because it can repurpose these underutilized or blighted properties scattered throughout our communities. The cost to evaluate and clean up brownfields often hinders new investment, but various incentives can help level the playing field to make these properties competitive. Funding can be leveraged to assist with 4 primary tasks of brownfield redevelopment: planning, assessments, cleanup, and finally the reuse of the property. Planning at the community level is important to provide a local strategy to tackle brownfield projects. Plus, this is important information for grant applications. Assessments provide a dual purpose. They define the areas of the potential contamination, and they provide liability protections for property transactions. Cleanup, which can be expensive, readies the site for its next use. Businesses and developers will invest in brownfields based on economics and market needs. Property may not be appealing economically, so many government funding sources recognize that recreational or green space uses are appropriate when supported by community planning. There are various funding types, and today I will go over free services, grants, and loans. Before we dive in, let's take a quick poll to determine where your current familiarity is with funding options. How familiar are you with grant funding options for brownfield assessments and cleanups? Not familiar at all, somewhat familiar, or very familiar?
Okay, and I have launched the poll, so when it pops up on your screen, please make your selection. And it looks like most have made their selection. If you have not, please go in and choose one. And I will be closing the poll shortly. And I am sharing the results. Back to you, Roxanne.
Thank you. It looks like most of you are somewhat familiar with the funding options that we have. Hopefully we have something new for you today. A lot of these programs have been in place, but due to federal and state funding changes, some of these things fluctuate quite a bit from year to year. All right, so the TBA program provides free environmental assessments to local governments. To be eligible for the program, the applicant must be a government or quasi-government entity or a nonprofit. This requirement includes land banks, port authorities, and regional councils. The property must be considered a brownfield and cannot be a single home residential. And as we discussed earlier, you do not need to know that there is a contamination on the property for it to be considered a brownfield. We prefer that the applicant not be the cause or contributor to the contamination, but depending on a case-by-case basis, sometimes we can work around this issue as the Ohio EPA applies on your behalf. The property also cannot be under any federal CERCLA orders or on the national priorities list. If you have a property in question that you're interested in applying for and you're unsure if it's eligible, please just feel free to reach out. The EPA or the TBA program does not require that the applicant own the property. So if a property is privately owned but a government priority, the eligible applicant can apply on the owner's behalf. The only thing we require is access to the property to conduct the assessments. We have a legal document that the owner will need to sign for consent. On occasion, the property is in transition and is in foreclosure. These properties can qualify, and the county auditor may act as an agent of the state to sign the access consent form. Forfeited properties are also eligible, and the community or land bank can sign the form. Free services offered in the TBA program include Phase 1 assessments, Phase 2, asbestos surveys, lead surveys, geophysical surveys, brownfield inventories, and planning activities such as vision plans or market studies. Ohio EPA has retained contractors who complete the work at no cost to the community, and a report is provided at the end of the project. It is a non-competitive program on a rolling basis. With the new brownfield infrastructure law, our available assessment funds have doubled, and we're spending almost $1 million annually in our program. The application is simple to fill out and found online, and I'll provide a link for you at the end of my presentation. Phase 1 assessments are usually the first step to determining where a property stands in the brownfield world. This investigation is non-intrusive and includes a site walkover. The report you receive will include historical records, the chain of title, former uses, and potential areas for contamination. This assessment is often required in a property transfer to protect the new owner of liability as a cause and contributor to any contamination on the property. Phase 2 assessments include the direct sampling of any soil and groundwater in the target areas identified in the Phase 1 assessment. This sampling characterizes the extent of contamination on the property and helps inform the property owner on how to proceed. Asbestos surveys are usually required before a building can be demolished, and we often perform these on abandoned gas station buildings, warehouses, and old school buildings. We also usually do lead surveys if needed. Typically, we can wrap up a project depending on the complexity of it within 4 to 5 months, assuming it just requires a Phase 1 and Phase 2. We have an internal approval process and a bidding process for the contractors. Lately, the volume of our applications has been pretty high, so the timeline is closer to 6 months. If you have a project with a timeline, we can sometimes work around that, but you just need to let us know as we still have to follow a process. The Ohio EPA provides technical assistance to help local governments and private individuals navigate this process. We provide collaboration meetings to discuss specific projects, help sort out funding options, and provide training to deliver education on the brownfields process and funding. This can either be a webinar or workshop like today, or we can come out to individual communities to meet with leaders and community members. Our voluntary action program, Ohio's formal voluntary cleanup program, provides free technical review of documents upon request by a community. Technical reviews can help complex projects navigate the rules and ensure cleanups are protective. Our technical assistance can be used as match towards other state funding if needed. Speaking on collaboration, we partner with other government agencies to help set a project up for success. We are continuously learning about the funding options that are available, both on the front end, such as assessments, and on the back end of a project, such as economic development. We can also leverage our program to partner with other agencies to share costs for the larger projects or provide a match for a grant project. Bottom line is, we're always looking for ways to help communities get to a project through to completion, and we're always open to new approaches. Moving on to some of the other state programs outside of the Ohio EPA. The Ohio Department of Development has a long history of providing funding for community development and assisting local governments, and the Abandoned Gas Station Cleanup Program is very popular, helping local governments reduce the blight caused by vacant gas stations. To be eligible, the site must be vacant and have no viable responsible party to complete the cleanup. The most common grant through this program is the Assessment Corrective Action Grant. Up to $250,000 can be requested to remove the tanks, conduct buster assessments called Tier 1 and Tier 2, and complete any necessary soil or groundwater cleanup and demolish any structures. No more than $100,000 of this grant can be spent on assessment activities, and a VAP Phase 1 is required for the program. This is to make sure that any impacts from the activities not related to the tanks and dispensers are also cleaned up. These areas often include old hydraulic lifts and auto repair areas. The grant can also handle asbestos abatement prior to demolition or reuse of any structures. Our TBA program is often used to assess a potential abandoned gas station program to determine if it's liable to go into the program. Occasionally, a property will have significant impacts to soil and groundwater that require extensive removal of contamination. The Cleanup and Remediation Grant provides up to $500,000 to clean up these projects. However, buster assessment activities are not eligible and consulting costs are capped at 15%. The next couple of programs we're going to look at are funded through the Ohio Water Development Authority. The Ohio Brownfield Loan Program offers up to $500,000 for assessments and up to $5 million for cleanup. These loans are available to both local governments and private entities. Loan terms are very reasonable for this. Funding has also been earmarked for the on-site stormwater loan program. Reduction of stormwater discharges and its proper management are ongoing concerns for communities and businesses. Many communities are considering brownfield properties in their stormwater management planning. This low-interest loan, up to $5 million, has similar terms as the brownfield loan. This slide shows an example of permeable pavers and a green roof. These features help reduce and divert stormwater flows, resulting in cost savings for stormwater management. Jobs Ohio is a private nonprofit corporation that administers many redevelopment incentives for Ohio. They have a variety of grants and loans to help end users transfer property, including brownfields. The revitalization program can assess and clean up brownfields in preparation for end users and job creation in targeted industry sectors. They provide direct assistance for phase 2 assessments with up to $200,000 in grant money, and they may grant up to $1 million for cleanup, but this is often coupled with a loan. Jobs Ohio will provide revitalization loans up to $5 million to cover up to 75% of eligible project costs. Eligible costs include demolition, asbestos lead paint abatement, environmental cleanup, site preparation, renovation, and infrastructure. Each project is evaluated based on the amount of funds invested by the end user and the certainty of its completion. This is a great option if you have an interested redeveloper that will be providing jobs to your community. The last program I'm going to talk about today is the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization. I know that's a mouthful. The Interagency Working Group is a newer collaboration effort that consists of 12 member agencies across the federal government to help support coal, oil, and gas and power plant communities as they transition. The working group focuses on getting the best funding options to the communities who need it. They do this by targeting 4 main areas: infrastructure, environmental cleanup, entrepreneurship, and workforce development. With infrastructure, funding helps to provide reliable broadband, good roads, clean water, modern sewer systems, and affordable local transportation. While a lot of cleanup funding comes from the US EPA, which you'll learn about shortly, other cleanup funding can help support land and industrial transformation, including deploying low carbon technologies at sites of former power plants and industrial facility programs to remediate abandoned mines, orphaned wells, and brownfields. Communities also deserve thriving small businesses that drive innovation, including the provision of support from them, from community development, financial institutions, nonprofits, and innovation hubs, as well as support for other training programs to align their workforces with actual industry growth in each key region. An example of one of the agencies that is a part of this working group is the Economic Development Administration. The EDA has a competitive grant program that focuses on impacted coal communities and can assist with economic diversification, job creation, capital investment, workforce development, and reemployment of opportunities. The infrastructure bill has poured significant amounts of funding into areas that can help a community as a whole transition to recover from these energy industries. So while the TBA program and other programs you hear about today can help start your brownfield projects, these are resources that will help you on the back end. I encourage you to learn more by visiting energycommunities.gov and by engaging in the working group social media channels. These slides will be available afterwards, so don't worry about copying down any of these links, but I provided both our main program website, which has our application link on it, as well as our outreach site that has upcoming trainings and workshops. If you have questions about any of these programs or specific project questions, Dan Schulker and I are always available to discuss your options. Speaking of workshops, we are approaching another funding round for US EPA grants, and the Ohio EPA is partnering with Kansas State University's Technical Assistance to Brownfields, or KSU TAB, and the US EPA to offer a grant writing workshop July 27th and 28th. This will be a virtual workshop offered over 2 days, and if you're new to the Brownfield grants and are thinking about applying, this training will give you a valuable guidance and tips for success. And if you missed it, we recently offered a webinar focused on how to get your feet wet in the grant funding world and growing your capacity, grant capacity as a community. This webinar was recorded and can be found on KSU Tab's website, or you can email me directly for the link. We also continuously post about these types of events through the Ohio EPA, so if you're interested in subscribing to our email list, please scan the QR code on your screen right now with your phone and sign up for the Brownfield Interested Party list and anything else you have interested in, as you can sign up for anything through the Ohio EPA. Hopefully, you're now more informed about the various brownfield funding sources in Ohio. We are always willing to help you navigate through the environmental regulations and funding options to help you with your project. With that, I will pass you over to Amy Yursevich to learn more about some additional grant funding assistance.
Thank you, Roxanne. My name's Amy Yursevich, and as I was introduced, I am a partner with the Kansas State University Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. I am also the Ohio contact to that program. So I have my information on some of these slides that will be copied, and feel free to contact me about any of these services we talk about or other services you think you may need. We tailor services whenever we can to meet the needs of the communities in the areas we serve. And with that short description, I'm going to pass this on so we can answer a quick poll question about your familiarity with our program. Okay, the poll question is, have you heard of US EPA's Technical Assistance to Brownfields, or TAB program? You can choose the answers yes, no, or I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, I have launched the poll, so go ahead and make your selection. And also just a quick reminder, because I know some people logged on a little bit late after I had done the opening remarks. Please check your handout icon later. You can find a copy of the slides. As Roxanne mentioned, their contact information is in that. There's a PDF version of PowerPoint, and it has all the links that are live. So go ahead and download that before you exit the webinar. And it looks like most have voted. If you have not made your selection, please make your final selection. And I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Back to you, Amy.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Okay, well, good. Oftentimes we have a decent number of people that have heard of it, and also a decent number of people that have not heard of it. And I hope for those of you, or that you may not be familiar with it, you've just heard the name. Sometimes you get it mixed up with TBA, which is Roxanne and Dan's program with the Targeted Brownfield Assistance. But today I hope to provide you more information about the TAB program, and even if you are familiar with it, maybe some services you weren't aware of that we can provide. Okay, the technical assistance to brownfields. The program is actually provided via grant from US EPA in the same way US EPA provides grants to the state, as Roxanne mentioned, and also to communities for assessments and cleanups and revolving loan funds and multi-purpose grants that Carla will be talking about next. They also provide a grant to organizations such as Kansas State University and also other nonprofits like the Center for Creative Land Recycling and the University of Connecticut. And these grants basically are provided to the 10 regions of US EPA. We actually serve as Kansas State University, Regions 5, 6, 7, and 8, as you can see in the purple right there. And what we do is provide services to communities, and both large and small, but we do like to focus whenever possible on the smaller communities that need more help, that may not be as familiar with or worked with brownfields much. And we can provide a whole host of services that I will be talking about in just a little bit. We also help out with the states. Roxanne mentioned the webinar that will be coming up regarding grant writing, and the one that just passed but is recorded regarding grant capacity and funding. And those are things that we work very closely with Roxanne and Dan in the state of Ohio to help with as well. So getting on to some of the services. We can help with identifying and inventorying brownfields, reviewing grant applications. Many people that are familiar with us are familiar because we can provide, if you have applied for a grant, we can provide reviews of your assessment, cleanup, a revolving loan fund, or multi-purpose applications prior to submittal to US EPA. It is a very competitive grant program, and folks find that this helps them quite a bit. We can help you with finding and evaluating environmental consultants, with community outreach and input, strategic planning, visioning, educational workshops, such as the ones I just mentioned that we work with Ohio EPA on, and identifying funding sources, economic feasibility and sustainability, review of plans and technical reports, fact sheets and information, and other assistance as needed and agreed upon. As I said, just because it's not listed here, but you may need some assistance, don't hesitate to contact us. And one of the other things I'll mention here is some of these things overlap with some of the free services that Roxanne mentioned that they provide. So we do work in close, very close collaboration with Ohio EPA, and oftentimes, you know, one or both of us can assist you in many of these, for many of these needs. Oh yes, and it's free. So all of this work, assistance that we can provide is done free of charge to communities. So I mentioned the brownfields inventory, just to talk a little bit about this. Roxanne mentioned what a brownfield is in her presentation. Basically, the main things you want to keep in mind is it is a real property or property, and there is known or suspected contamination just because of what might have gone on the property in the past. There may not be contamination, but there could be. So inventorying of brownfields is going to be looking at all those types of properties. So one of the services we provide with inventorying is helping you by letting you know the resources available that can help identify these brownfields. And these could be things such as tax records, or maybe contacting Dan Jolker or Roxanne in Ohio EPA, because Ohio EPA maintains records of sites that maybe they sampled in the past, but they didn't choose to enforce, or maybe there's been other work that's done on them. If the site meets the brownfields definition, we can help you if there's any confusion there. And the type of data that you might need to compile or want to compile that will be useful in your brownfields inventory. And this data can range from the acreage to available infrastructure, including, are you close to major highways, waterways, that sort of thing, zoning, these types of things that you're going to be concerned about once the site has been assessed and, if needed, cleaned up and you want to redevelop it. There is a tool, Brownfields Inventory tool, that Kansas State has created. And it is both a mobile tool and an online tool, and it will allow you to compile brownfields data. It is, very careful access requirements are built into this, so you don't have to worry. I know, as Roxanne mentioned, many communities are concerned about people knowing all about what their brownfields might be. this can be set up so, you know, only your community has access and only certain people do. One of the nice features of this is it recently developed a mobile bit version, so you can go out on your phone and take pictures of the site, you know, real-time information that you can get from the site. Maybe if you're doing some sampling and things like that, that can all be put down, and then it can be sent back to you know, your major database, you know, likely on your laptop or on your computer. I've worked with the beta testing for this, and it works really nicely. It's a really nice system. Another tool that we have is the online grant writing tool, and it is a template for the various grants that become available in the fall from US EPA, multi-purpose assessment, cleanup, and RLF grant applications. Not every year, every year there may be some of these available and some of them left out. Usually it has to do with multi-purpose and RLF, but I'll leave that for Carla to talk about. But anyway, we do have the templates that are needed. As soon as the grant guidelines come out, which is usually in the early fall, we work really hard at TAB to update everything. And this is the link to get to this. Even if you don't want to download it and use it for your grant writing, we highly recommend you take a look at it. It has a lot of helpful hints on it. It really makes it easy to kind of follow the guidelines and write the grant. So as I mentioned before, many communities know us because we do review MARC grants. And we will look at all of the different types of grants. We can usually turn around. The turnaround can be as short as a day, but up to 3 days typically. And we can also review unsuccessful grant applications from the previous year. We've done this on a couple of different occasions so that you are really prepared to write your grant for the upcoming year, and then you can have that reviewed as well. We're preparing an RFP, request for proposal for an environmental consultant. If you are awarded a US EPA grant, one of the first tasks is to hire an environmental consultant that is going to help you with your assessment, cleanup, or both on the site, depending on the grant. And for those communities that have not done this before, it can often be a bit of a daunting task because it is, you know, fairly technical, and you want to make sure you get the right consultant in to do really good work on your property. We can help with this. We can provide assistance as far as scope. If it's an assessment grant, we may be talking about the scope of assessments on very different properties. Cleanup, the type of cleanup is going to change the scope, so we can kind of help you with that and walk along. And also we can develop evaluation criteria so that once you receive your responses to your RFP or RFQ, you can make a better decision or help you make a good decision on what consultant you want to choose. We can review them as well. You'll be reviewing them, but we can put our 2 cents worth in, so you can request that from TAB, and we'll be looking at you know, some basic things like the contractor's experience, working with the type of scope of work, the type of cleanup, or a particular type of assessment. How familiar are they working with the voluntary cleanup program here in Ohio, the VAC? How, you know, what kind of experience do they have working with EPA brownfield grant implementation for cleanup or assessment grants or other grants? And what's their safety record? That's really important, because if they're not, you know, being safe on the property and doing the activities that they're doing, you know, you're not going to get a good consultant. Another service we provide, and this is something that we've helped with and Ohio EPA with, and they also provide as well, as community outreach and input. And it is a very important aspect of either prior to your grant, and we usually encourage prior, but certainly with once you get a grant, doing a, you know, outreach to the community, and effective outreach that is going to help your project. It'll help to develop a viable project and a successful project. It is going to be a win-win, whether you think it or not. Community leaders will identify citizens' concerns early on. You're going to know what's going on. You don't want to get started on your project and then have a big problem with the community surrounding it and have to go back and reinvent the wheel. On the other hand, on the citizen side, they become more invested in the project. If they know you care about their opinions and what their concerns are, they're going to become invested in the project and they're going to provide help to you. And along those lines, TAB can provide assistance with strategic planning and reuse visioning. So coming up with a plan for your project, particularly if you're going to be applying for, say, an Ohio grant or a US EPA brownfield grant. Community outreach and input, again, as I mentioned, very important aspect of any type of brownfield grant you're going to be looking at or once you receive. Redevelopment goals, that's another part of the planning process. What are you looking for, and do you have the community acceptance for how you're going to redevelop a site or a group of sites? And we also provide a lot of assistance with facilitating stakeholder meetings. So here are some of our resources. I've mentioned some today, but we've done this kind of lists out a little bit of a fairly comprehensive list of things that we've done, projects we've assisted communities with in the past. And along with kind of your jack of all trades like myself or Beth Grigsby, who is our Region 5 coordinator, and we work mostly with Ohio, we do have individuals that have a very specialized experience, such as EJ outreach and involvement, real estate finance, conducting market studies, and working with solid and hazardous waste. These are people that are often have worked in this field for, specific field for a long time. They're a partner with TAB, and we can easily provide those resources to you. So with that, we have one more poll question that gets to how you feel about TAB and what we can provide. And now you know that TAB can provide many free brownfield services. How likely are you to request TAB services in the future? So very likely, likely, somewhat likely, not sure, unlikely.
Okay, I've launched the poll, so go ahead and make your selection. And it looks like most people have voted. If you have not, go ahead and please make your selection before I close out the poll. Okay, I'm sharing the results. Back to you.
All right. Well, I'm happy to say that there's a good number of you that are likely, very likely, or likely. And even if some of you aren't sure, hopefully you'll listen to some of our webinars in the future and maybe see where TAB can fit in, assisting you with the brownfields, setting up brownfields programs, getting your program up to speed, applying for grants, things like that. So I really appreciate all the information. And I'm going to conclude. My contact information is there on this slide. And as Roxanne also mentioned, we are having a grant writing strategies webinar, which we usually hold every year in conjunction with Ohio EPA. It's a 2-day webinar that focuses on information for those entities interested in applying or reapplying for US EPA grant. And the link is right there. It's not up yet to register, but should be up in about 2 weeks. So you can go to that link. Also, if you're on Roxanne's interested party list, brownfield list, she'll be getting a message out to you, I assume, because Roxanne's usually really good about that. And I'll also mention, I know these slides are being, this webinar is being recorded, but I also provided 2 tab handouts in the handout section of this, and that goes over a lot of what I talked about today. So I thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass this over to Carla Ocker from USCPA.
Thanks, Amy. Hey, and one thing I want to mention to everybody about the KSU Tab Grant Ohio EPA Grant Writing Strategies webinar, it's a half-day webinar. So it's 2 days, but it's about 9 to 12 or 12:30. Just so you know, so you can kind of plan. We're not asking you to give up 2 full days of your time. Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm Carla Ocker. I'm with USCPA Brownfields in Region 5. I'm hoping that I know many of you who are out there. I am stationed in Ohio as opposed to Chicago, where our regional office is. So please, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about our grants, and know that I'm local and I'm aware of and concerned with the brownfields in Ohio in particular. You might be considering applying for a brownfields funding, in particular assessment funding. Assessment funding is our most popular grant program and has been for many, many years. However, sometimes thinking about going for a US EPA assessment grant is sort of a daunting task. And you may say, well, do I really need a US EPA assessment grant, or am I better off hooking into some of the help that Ohio EPA and TAB has to offer to me? So I wanted to just start off with going through a few considerations for assessment funding. One thing you want to think about is, how many brownfields do you have in your community? If you just have a few, you might want to just hook in with Ohio EPA and let them do some targeted brownfields assessments on the few sites that you have. However, if you're a larger community, or you have a more complex site, or you have many brownfields, you might want to consider using US EPA grants, or even federal. We have a federal program that mirrors Ohio EPA's program for targeted brownfields assessments. The next thing you might want to talk about is, does your organization really have the knowledge, and do you have the capacity to manage a grant? It takes some time to manage these grants. You can't just give it to somebody as kind of a side gig and hope that they're going to be able to get their head around how to manage the grant and do the reporting and that sort of thing. So, if your organization doesn't have, a bit of capacity and really is a newbie at brownfields, your first step might be, you might be better off asking Ohio EPA for their a brownfields assessment, or maybe even their technical assistance to help you kind of get going. There's also US EPA targeted brownfields assessment funding that's available, or another option, and I'll talk about this in a little more detail as I go through my slides. You might consider being a coalition member for one of the larger US EPA grants, where a higher capacity, large organization that has oftentimes a larger geographic area, they are the lead coalition member, and then they will have 2 to 3 additional coalition members that are oftentimes more low capacity in smaller communities. If you do have the knowledge and the capacity to manage a grant, go for it. Apply for the US EPA grants. And what's your timeline? If you need an assessment within the next 3 to 6 months, you need to touch base with Ohio EPA and ask them about their targeted brownfields assessment funding, and they'll help you determine whether it's better for you to use US EPA's assistance or Ohio EPA's. But if you want to develop a program and you have a longer time frame, say like you've got a target area, a corridor, a river corridor, a street that you want to, that has multiple brownfield sites on it, and you want to develop that and assess many sites, you're better off considering a US EPA grant. Now that said, I just want to let you know, these are what our typical grant offerings are. We offer assessment grants, cleanup grants, multi-purpose grants, which is kind of a combination between assessment and cleanup, and RLFs. This year, like Amy said, we don't offer every grant every year. This year, we won't be offering the RLF. So I won't talk about the RLF grant in my presentation today. And one last thing I wanted to mention is you're considering, applying for a US EPA grant. The bipartisan infrastructure law that was signed by President Biden in 2021 really has increased our focus on getting funds to new and low capacity communities. That's why we've changed our coalition assessment grants and said that only a high capacity entity can be the lead coalition member, and the lower capacity communities need to be the coalition partners. We also are increasing our interest in community involvement. We've always focused on community involvement and always focused on getting, helping environmental justice communities, but that has become even more to the forefront, and you'll see some of the details of how that's become more of a higher priority for us when I talk about the grants in the next few slides. We've also increased the amount of money we have available and increased our our priorities for cleanup funding. As you can see from the last slide, there's 3 tiers of cleanup funding available. And I'll get into more details on that as I move on. So let's start with our most popular and most applied for grant, the community-wide assessment grants. Those assessment grants are offered for up to $500,000 per award. You have 4 years to spend your money from the time the award is granted. And just to give you a feel for how much money is out there and how many awards we give each year, this last year, because we have the infrastructure law money, we gave out 110 community-wide assessment grants, and more than half of those were to new grantees. And I have a definition from last year's grant guidelines of what's considered a new grantee. So if you were a grantee years and years ago, make sure you look at the definition in this year's grant guidelines, because you may qualify as a new grantee. And we have 2 pots of money. We have a pot set aside for new grantees, and we have a pot set aside for experienced grantees. And it's usually a little bit less competitive to come in as a new grantee as opposed to an experienced grantee, just because those experienced grantees can show a track record. That's why we set it up as 2 pots. You have to identify a target area if you're coming in for a community-wide assessment grant. I mentioned earlier, a US EPA grant might be the best thing for you if you've got a corridor of some sort, be it river, be it a street, you've got an old, say an old factory that is many, many acres and it's a very complex site. That can be your target area too. We allow up to $200,000 to be spent for assessment per site. And you define the site. So say, for instance, you've got a big manufacturing complex. Different portions of that complex can be considered individual sites. So you really can assess, if you have like a big manufacturing complex that has been closed and is really dilapidated, you can spend more than $200,000 on the entire complex because the grantee defines what the site is. Our community-wide assessment grants can be used for assessments, planning, and also community engagement. I like to describe our assessment grants as you can use the money for everything up until the time that you start to dig dirt. Grantees will have to procure an environmental consultant to conduct the assessments, and that's where TAB can help you out with putting together a request for proposals. And you have to follow federal procurement regulations, and we've got guidance on that in TAB and Ohio EPA and myself as well can help you through that process. One thing to keep in mind, if you're a little bit newer to the brownfields program or to remediating brownfields and assessing them, your consultant that you hire can really provide a lot of technical and grant management assistance. There's a lot of experienced consultants out there who've worked with communities who've had our grants for many, many years. So when you're thinking about your request for proposals, if you think you need a little more technical assistance, make sure you put that in your RFP. The next kind of assessment grant I'd like to talk about is our coalition assessment grant. These are higher dollar grants. We award up to $1 million because, you know, it's a coalition. There's more than one grantee or entity using that money. It too has a 4-year project period, and you can use the coalition assessment grant for the same kinds of activities a normal community-wide assessment grant can be used for. Last year, we awarded $17.7 million, and we gave 19 awards. We didn't have as many coalition assessment grant applications last year because we changed the criterion for, or the qualifications you had to have to be a lead coalition member, which is one of the reasons why we had so few applicants. And we'll talk a little more about this in the next slide. As I said, you have to have 1 lead member, and you can have 2 to 4 non-lead members. And this is based on last year's guidelines. The number of non-lead members could change this year, so just make sure you glance at the guidelines. I don't anticipate that the number of non-lead members, like the requirement that you have to have at least 2 and no more than 4, I don't anticipate that that's going to change, but check it out. This is where we really narrowed down, the next bullet addresses where we really narrowed down who can be a lead member. Lead members must be a state, a county, a tribe, a regional council, or a group of general purpose units of government. One of the suggestions for this year's guidelines is to open up the lead membership to land banks. And those would end up being like county land banks, I'm sure, as opposed to community, like city land banks. But keep your eyes open for that. Land banks may be allowed to be a lead member next year. And the non-lead members cannot have had a MARC grant that closed in 2015 or later. That's from last year's guidelines. Chances are that it'll go to 2016 or later for next year's. But as you can see, we are reaching out to low capacity and smaller communities by making the lead member be high capacity, larger grantee, and then the non-lead members be newer grantees. One of the things that we highly encourage is that a nonprofit is one of the non-lead members, and that's to promote strong community involvement. You don't have to have a nonprofit as a non-lead non-lead member for the coalition assessment grant, but you'd better make sure that you have a way to reach out to the community and you can really show that you do have and will continue to have strong community involvement with the assessment grants. You must assess at least 2 sites in each of the coalition members' geographic areas, and the target areas cannot overlap. So the geographic area of the members can overlap, so you can have a county and say a city within a county. However, if the county picks a particular focus area, it cannot be the same as the focus area for one of the smaller non-lead members. You can assess sites outside the target area, but there must be a correlation between those sites outside the target area that you want to assess and the target area. For instance, demographics need to be similar. You know, the unemployment rate needs to be similar. You can't have your target area be an area where, you know, has a really high unemployment and a high poverty rate, and then go use your assessment funds on an area that is very, very wealthy and has a low unemployment rate. Now, our cleanup grants. We're really focusing on cleanup since the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we're funding the cleanup grant program at a higher level than we did prior to the infrastructure law being made available. We have 3 tiers of cleanup. So up to $500,000, those grant applications are reviewed as a set. 500 to $1 million, that's another set. 1 million to 2 million, that's a third set. So you're only competing against grant applications that are of similar monetary ask. There is no cost share requirement. You have 4 years to get your cleanup done. And just to kind of give you a feel for how it went last year, we awarded $92.3 million in 36 awards. There were 31 awards for the up to $500,000 group. 500 to $1 million, we had 34 awards, and 1 to 2 million, 26 awards. Now the 500 to $1 million, it's just as a kind of an interesting tidbit. Most of those were for like $600,000 and $700,000. Not too many of them were upwards of $1 million. So I'm not really sure why that is, but that's why we were able to give out quite a few of the $500 to $1 million awards. One thing you need to think about and plan for is the applicant must own the site by the time that the grant applications are due. And the applicant cannot be a responsible party as defined in Superfund, and has to have completed all appropriate inquiry. So that means you need to have an ASTM 15, 27, 13, or 21 phase 1 assessment completed for the site prior to application. Last year, one thing that might be different this year is that last year, if a site had received cleanup grant money in previous years, when, back before the infrastructure law, we only awarded up to $200,000 per site for cleanup. And now, as you can see, we're going up to $2 million. Last year, we wanted to spread the money around to new sites. So we said that even if you'd only received a site had only received a $200,000 cleanup grant from US EPA, you couldn't come in last year for additional funding. $200,000 doesn't go very far in cleaning up a brownfield site. So sometimes those $200,000 cleanup grants were only to address, say, a particular part of a site, like what you would consider maybe an operable unit. Maybe it was a lagoon that got cleaned up or some soil contamination, but there's still other contamination on the site. There's talk amongst headquarters in the regions that this year, this may change. So if you have old sites in your community that received brownfield funding in the past, you might want to kind of look at those and give some thought to whether you want to consider applying for additional cleanup funding this year. One other thing about the assessment, I said that you have to have a phase 1 assessment already done to be able to apply for a cleanup grant. But you also need to show that you have fully assessed the site and the site is ready for cleanup, and it doesn't need significant additional assessment in order to put together a remedial action plan and or what would be called a cleanup plan. And last year, and I think this is going to be the same for this year, we don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's going to stay the same. You will need a letter from the state of Ohio stating the site has been characterized thoroughly enough to develop a cleanup plan. So plan ahead, because Ohio EPA they'll have information on their website about how to submit your reports so that they can look at them and make this determination. This letter from the state has to be an attachment to the cleanup grant application. And the last grant I'd like to talk about is our multi-purpose grants. They're kind of a combination of a cleanup grant and an assessment grant. You can use the money for both kinds of activities. Once again, they can be used, like I said, for planning, assessments, and cleanups. We will award up to $800,000, and you've got 5 years to spend that money. The reason that it has a longer project period is so that you can get assessments done, you can make your decisions, you can do your community involvement prior to coming up with a cleanup plan and implementing that cleanup plan. Once again, with this one, there's no cost share requirement because we're using the infrastructure law funding. And last year, we awarded $17.8 million for 18 grants. If you apply for a multi-purpose grant, because it's a combination of a cleanup grant and an assessment grant, you cannot apply for an assessment grant or a cleanup grant as well, whether that's community-wide assessment or coalition. There's a huge emphasis on completing actions within your target area. The multi-purpose grants aren't really designed just to give a community a pot of money that they can do whatever they want with throughout their whole community. We are really pushing for a multi-purpose grants to help an area, a target area that needs both assessment and cleanup, so that we can raise a whole area and make it better for redevelopment and get more bang for our buck, because you're leveraging your cleanup and your assessment money. The minimum requirements for a multi-purpose grant are the bar's pretty low. You have to complete at least one phase 2 assessment and clean up one site. Cleanup sites that previously received a cleanup grant can receive the multi-purpose, can be cleaned up with a multi-purpose grant, which last year was the difference between a regular cleanup grant and the multi-purpose grants. And you have to come up with a reuse plan for at least one site if a reuse plan does not exist. If a reuse plan for a site or an area, like an area-wide plan, already exists, make sure that you tell us that in your grant application. If you want more information, once again, we're plugging that Ohio EPA grant writing workshop. I am a contact, and then this is just more information to hook it back up with Ohio EPA and US EPA. And with that, I am done.
Okay, thank you, everyone. All the presenters, lots of great information, and I know we're currently at 2 o'clock, but we had a couple great questions come in, so I'd like to do those real quick, and then we'll do a wrap up and get everybody on their way. So the first question is, what's the major difference between the Ohio EPA grants for brownfields versus the US EPA grants?
I can start with that. Some of the major differences between the Ohio grants and the US EPA grants that Carla covered is that the US EPA grants are competitive, whereas the Ohio ones are not. And then if you've noticed, the quantity of money that you can get for a project can be significantly larger through the US EPA than through the Ohio EPA TVA program. In addition to that, Carla, do you have anything to add? Some big differences? We also don't do major cleanups. I guess that would be the other one.
Yeah. And the time frame is a lot different. If you need an assessment done quickly, Ohio EPA's Target Brownfields Assessment Program is for you. If you want to develop a program or attack an entire area, like a target area, the federal grants are probably your best bet. But you can always start with an assessment through Ohio EPA and use that work and include that in your grant application for a US EPA grant.
Okay, and here's a question for Amy. Does TAB or KSU have a standing directory of consultants in each region or state?
They, on their website, they do have a listing of the different people that provide TAB services, if that's what they're asking, TAB partners such as myself. And I did put that, I put it in, I don't know if Dan's had a chance to put it in the chat box yet, or the question box, but I do have a link for that. They also list the TAB partners that have kind of specialized expertise, as I mentioned during my presentation, things like being able to do market studies or real estate financing or environmental justice issues. And those individuals are also listed on the website, but they do not, they don't operate just in one region or just in one state. We call on them when we need that specific type of service, and they're able to provide that.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you, Roxanne, Amy, and Carla, for your great presentations. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email after the webinar with a link to the recording, a link to the session survey, and a link to your certificate of attendance to download. And the session survey will also pop up once the webinar ends. We value your feedback and would greatly appreciate it if you let us know how we're doing and let us know if there's anything we can do to further assist you. As a reminder, CEUs are available for this session. To receive credit for REHS or EHSIT certification hours, please respond to the question about CEUs in the session survey. Then we'd also like to bring your attention to our Encouraging Environmental Excellence Award Program, which recognizes entities for exceptional achievements in environmental stewardship. This program has different levels of recognition for organizations, communities, and schools. Please go to our website on the slide to learn more about this program. And then for our upcoming webinars, we have on July 12th, Ohio EPA regulations in the community. On the 25th, we have an infectious waste overview. And then on August 8th, we have a webinar on scrap tire regulations and infrastructure. And to register for those upcoming webinars, check out our agency event calendar at the link on the slide. The events calendar is on our main web page. The link's also on our web page footer at the bottom of every web page. To receive notifications of upcoming webinars or conferences, go to our Ohio EPA Resource Hub. This is formerly known as the Customer Support Center. You can create an account, go to the option Subscribe to Updates, then select the subscription All Trainings, Webinars, and Conferences. And there's a link on the slide, and the Resource Hub's also on the bottom footer of every web page. If you miss past webinars, you can go to DEFA's webpage, the link on the slide. Once you're there, you can click on Training on the left-hand menu column. You'll find recordings of trainings you might have missed. You can also go to our agency YouTube channel to view recorded webinars. We'll post a recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. It usually posts within a few weeks of the webinar. We also post a PDF copy of the PowerPoint slides with the recording. And the YouTube channel link can also be found at the bottom of each of our web pages on the footer. It's right next to the Twitter icon on the bottom right side. With that, we'll end today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.